Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Diane Holik. Diane Tammy Holik was born in 1958 in New York City and was known to her friends and family as a hardworking and joyful person. Her work ethic led to financial stability and her successful career. For over 20 years, she worked at IBM, a leading global technology company. In 1996, she relocated to Austin, Texas, where she held a senior position that allowed her to work remotely from her home office. Diane purchased a luxurious home in the suburbs of Austin and lived a privileged life, often hosting wine tastings, dining at upscale restaurants, and frequenting dance clubs. She was also involved in charity work and made efforts to improve her personal life. However, her life took a turn in mid-November 2001 when a severe storm warning was issued for Texas, bringing heavy rain and tornadoes to the Austin area. As a result, Diane worked from home on the morning of November 16th, but suddenly became unresponsive during a scheduled work call. Diane had multiple phones, but she wasn't answering any of them. Her co-workers left messages asking her to call back, but when she didn't respond, they grew concerned. They contacted the police department and requested that someone check on Diane at her home. When the officers arrived, Diane's neighbor offered a spare key, allowing the police to enter the house. Inside, they found an eerie silence, broken only by the sound of dogs emerging from the kitchen. As the police searched the house, they found Diane's body in the bedroom on the second floor. The detectives were called to the scene, and they were struck by the unusual cleanliness of the crime scene. There were no signs of theft, struggle, or forced entry. Diane's body was fully dressed and lying next to her bed. The detectives quickly realized that they were dealing with a crime. The investigation revealed distinct strangulation marks on Diane's neck, likely caused by a rope or similar object. Her wrists also showed signs of being bound with cable ties. The cleanliness of the house, the lack of stolen valuables, and the absence of forced entry led the detectives to believe that Diane's killer was someone she knew and trusted. They suspected that the killer was someone she had let into her home voluntarily. An investigation into Diane's death revealed no signs of forced intimacy, but detectives did find suspicious dark spots and red stains on the carpet near the bedroom entrance. A towel on the back of the sofa in the living room caught their attention due to its mismatch with the otherwise clean and orderly surroundings, prompting them to send it to the laboratory for examination. Diane's acquaintances reported that she had no known enemies, and the police discovered that she was in a romantic relationship with Dennis Conley, a man she had plans to spend her life with. Diane had been married before, but that marriage ended quickly. She met Dennis through a dating service, and he had 2 children from a previous marriage. Dennis was a businessman living in Houston, 150 miles from Austin, where Diane resided. Despite the distance, Diane and Dennis formed a close bond, with Dennis proposing to her after 2 months with a valuable platinum ring. However, according to Diane's friends, the relationship began to decline recently. Diane had been feeling controlled by Dennis at times. Diane was also troubled by the decision to relocate to Houston, which meant leaving her home in the suburbs of Austin. She put her house up for sale, but realtors struggled to find a buyer willing to pay the asking price of $435,000. This led detectives to suspect that Dennis might be involved in Diane's death, prompting them to invite him to the police station for a conversation. Dennis agreed to speak with them without a lawyer. The medical examiner determined that Diane died sometime between 3 p.m. on November 15th and 3 a.m. on November 16th. Notably, the wedding ring Dennis had given her was missing from her finger, while her other jewelry remained untouched in the bedroom. This raised questions about the killer's motives and whether the ring was removed to mislead investigators. During the police interview, Dennis appeared to be a grieving man. He was asked about his relationship with Diane and his whereabouts on the day of her death and the day her body was found. Dennis claimed he was in Houston at the time. He stated that he last spoke with Diane on the morning of November 15th and spent the rest of the day at work without contacting her again. When he couldn't reach Diane the next morning, he left a message on her voicemail. The police took Dennis' fingerprints and DNA sample, but ultimately cleared him as a suspect after verifying his alibi. He had not left the city, so the detectives had to expand their search for a new lead. Further inquiry revealed that an unknown man had inspected Diane's house a few days before her death, claiming to be a potential buyer. He had planned to return with his wife to make a joint purchase decision. This clue became a top priority for the police, who began questioning the owners of properties for sale in the area, hoping that someone may have seen this mysterious buyer. Several women in the area reported that a suspicious man had visited their homes around the time of Diane's murder. He, described as being 35 to 45 years old with a large nose and dark hair, had arrived unaccompanied by a real estate agent. 6 of the women refused to let him in, but one allowed him to enter and view her home. She who let him in reported that he acted strangely, showing no interest in the layout of the house or its features. Instead, he specifically asked to see the bedroom on the second floor. When she became uncomfortable and asked him to leave, he introduced himself as Walter Miller. The police searched their databases for anyone matching the name Walter Miller, but the individuals they found did not match his age or appearance. A forensic artist created a sketch of the suspect based on the women's descriptions. Diane's killer removed the cable ties that had bound her hands, but the rationale behind this action is unclear. Did he know his victim personally? A subsequent autopsy revealed no evidence of forced intimacy or assault, yet the police remained vigilant, returning to the crime scene to search for potential traces of semen. However, these efforts yielded nothing. A police sketch of a potential suspect in the Diane Holik case was broadcast on the evening news, urging anyone who recognized the person to come forward. One of the few leads investigators had was a towel from Diane's house with a few short hairs on it. But the hairs were rootless, making it impossible to obtain a complete DNA sample. A woman contacted the police after seeing the sketch and reported a similar encounter. She and her husband had put their house up for sale 6 months prior, and a man had come to visit, claiming he wanted to buy the house for cash and needed to see it first. However, she refused to let him in, and he left. 2 months later, the same man returned to her doorstep and introduced himself as Jim Taylor. She was home alone with her young daughter, as her husband had just left for work. He asked to look around the house, but she denied his request again. This time, he became angry and aggressive, yelling and demanding to be let in. She immediately recalled the encounter and remembered writing down his name and the license plate number of his minivan. The police now had a crucial lead to investigate. A search of the vehicle's registration revealed that the owner was not Jim Taylor, but Patrick Anthony Russo. Initially, Russo seemed like an unlikely suspect. He was a married man with 2 children, lived 40 minutes outside of Austin, and was a member of a church music band. However, a deeper look into his past revealed a disturbing history of violent crimes against women. Russo had been convicted of a series of attacks, including one that involved abducting and attempting to strangle a victim with cable ties. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison but was released on parole after serving only 8 years. While in prison, he met his future wife, Janet, a church volunteer. The police found it hard to believe that Russo's connection to the case was mere coincidence. The police visited Anthony Russo's house with a search warrant, and he seemed unsurprised by their arrival. Although they found no evidence of Diane's belongings, including her ring, in his house or minivan, a neighbor reported seeing a similar vehicle at Diane's house on the day she died. In the utility room, investigators discovered cable ties identical to those that left marks on Diane's wrists. However, these ties are widely available at hardware stores. The police asked Anthony to come to the station for further questioning, where they inquired about his whereabouts on November 15th and 16th. Anthony claimed that on the 15th, he drove to Austin to visit a religious radio station but was unable to enter because no one answered the door. Notably, the radio station was near Diane's house. He stated that he left the station around 4 p.m. but got lost due to a hurricane, arriving home around 6 p.m. This alibi is questionable, as the forensic medical expert reported that Diane died between 3 p.m. and 3 a.m. Russo was questioned by the police about whether he was looking to buy a house. He claimed he had not inquired about any properties for buy, which would later prove to be an important statement. When shown a photo of Diane, Russo remained impassive and denied having met her. With no evidence connecting him to the crime, the police had no choice but to release him. However, when detectives investigated further by visiting a radio station Russo had mentioned, they discovered that his previous statement was a fabrication. The employees at a local business explained that they didn't lock the doors during a tornado warning because a large crowd had gathered in the lobby. Meanwhile, a woman who was selling her house contacted the police after encountering a man who resembled the suspect in a recent crime. She had been at home with her child when he came to her door, claiming to be interested in buying a house. He was holding a pamphlet with real estate listings, including her own home. She allowed him into her home, but when she showed him a bedroom, he attempted to attack her. However, he quickly fled when he heard her child crying in the next room. She retained the pamphlet, which was later given to the police. They found a clear fingerprint on the pamphlet, which belonged to Anthony Russo. Russo denied ever looking at houses for sale, but the fingerprint proved he had lied to the police. Russo's false statement was a misdemeanor, and since he was still on probation, it was a violation of his parole conditions. The police arrested him, fearing that he might flee while they searched for evidence linking him to the death of Diane. To ensure public safety, the authorities decided to keep Russo in custody. The police were able to locate 15 women who had showed homes to a man who matched Anthony Russo's description. All 15 women were asked to identify the suspect from a lineup of 5 men who were similarly dressed and had similar appearances. However, only 10 of the women were able to positively identify Russo as he who had visited them to view homes. The remaining 5 women were unable to make an identification. Despite this, the police still had reason to believe Russo was involved in the crime and brought him in for further questioning. During the interrogation, Russo continued to deny any involvement in the crime, but eventually stopped answering questions and requested to see his wife. Meanwhile, the police received the results of a DNA analysis from the laboratory. The results showed that a hair found on a towel at the victim's home matched Russo's DNA profile. While this was a significant piece of evidence, it was not conclusive, as there was a small chance that the hair could have belonged to someone else with the same DNA profile. Despite the accumulation of circumstantial evidence, the police still lacked a direct link between Russo and the victim's death. Investigation revealed 2 key pieces of evidence that implicated in Diane's death. Firstly, cell phone data placed Russo in the same area as Diane on the day she died. Secondly, a thorough examination of Russo's home computer uncovered a disturbing search history. Russo frequently visited an adult website where he consumed content explicitly depicting strangulation during intimate activities. Furthermore, the website required subscription, indicating that Russo actively sought out this material and was willing to pay for it. 2 days prior to Diane's death, Russo had accessed a particular story on the website that told the tale of a man who, under the guise of being a buyer, infiltrated a lonely woman's home, strangled her, and then stole valuables to make the crime appear as a robbery, thus disguising his true motive of satiating his desire for strangulation. Detectives delved into Russo's financial life and found he and his wife had a mere $2,000 in savings and were still making mortgage payments on their current home, clearly indicating he was in no position to buy a new house. Without concrete evidence, Police arrested Russo and charged him with the murder of Diane Holik nearly 2.5 years after her death, which took place on November 15, 2001. In court, 14 women testifying under oath that Russo had approached them about viewing homes, often visiting them in person on the day of the murder. Notably, these women all matched a specific profile, suggesting Russo had been observing them beforehand. While most refused him entry, one woman allowed him in initially but soon asked him to leave due to his strange demeanor. Russo's interest in homes was not random, as he specifically sought out homes occupied by women of a particular age group. The prosecution presented evidence that Russo visited homes for sale, often targeting women who lived alone. Russo visited Diane's house again, likely at her invitation, but this time with a specific intention. He had planned his actions carefully to avoid leaving any evidence. On a rainy day, Diane offered him a towel to dry off, which he casually discarded on the back of the sofa. As she showed him around the house, Russo attacked her on the second floor. Prosecutors believed that Russo derived pleasure from the act of strangulation, which ultimately led to Diane's death. Before leaving the scene, Russo took cable ties and Diane's wedding ring, which were never found by the police. He used a spare key hidden at the front door to lock up behind him. This was the prosecution's version of events. At the trial, Russo's current and former wives testified that he had a history of enjoying the act of strangulation. It's worth noting that Russo had a prior conviction for a similar crime. After deliberating for 11 hours, the jury found Patrick Anthony Russo guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison, but never admitted to his guilt, despite his history of similar crimes. Russo will become eligible for parole again and can submit his initial petition in 2044. At that point, he will be approximately 80 years old.